Hello again. So here is the stuff you need to know for the vertebrae. If you were to come into the bone room, you'd get a vertebrae like this. It's all strung on fishing lines so we can keep them together so we don't lose all the pieces. Now, you want to know that your there's your cervical spine, your cervical vertebrae. And then there's your thoracic vertebrae, which is going to go through, you guessed it, your thoracic cage. That's the cage enclosed by your ribs, your thoracic cage. So that would make sense that that would be called your thoracic vertebrae. And then the bottom of your back, the lower of your back, is called the lumbar. And then it goes your sacrum and your coccyx. So in your neck, your cervical has 7 of these bones, little bitty bones. And then your thoracic has 12 bones, medium-sized bones. And then your lumbar has 5 big fat bones at the bottom. And then your sacrum and your coccyx. And I'll get out the sacrum and coccyx and show you when we're done with this. So if you were to come into the bone room, you would get to see that all these strung on a fishing line. The very top of your, the very top 2 bones of your cervical spine is the atlas and axis. And you can tell this atlas and axis because they look different than all the rest of them. Now, your atlas sits on top of your axis. The second bone is your axis, and it has this this little nub here. It's called the dens, or the odontoid process. And this little nub, and the atlas sits on top of that. So, and that's your pivot point. So you can shake your head no, you can move it up and down yes. And also, the atlas has this cartilage on top of it, if you can see that. And this, this flat surface, there's no cartilage on this model specifically, but there would be cartilage there. And this flat surface all these flat surfaces are flat because they connect to another bone somewhere in the body. And this applies to your entire skeleton, not just the vertebrae. The flat little surfaces are flat because they would connect to another bone, and it wouldn't work if the 2 bones were connected and they had rough edges, because then it would be constantly grinding against each other and that would hurt. So it's flat surfaces so they can fit together like pieces of a puzzle, and those flat surfaces are usually referred to as condyles. C-O-N-D-Y-L-E-S, condyles, or condyle is singular. So these specific condyles on this atlas, this top, this is where the back of your skull sits. Here's your skull, and on the very bottom of the skull, as you can see, here's his face, and on the very bottom of the skull, let's see, can you see that? All right, so I'm going to turn this up, and you see this big old hole? That is the foramen magnum. Foramen just means a hole, and magnum means big, so big hole, foramen magnum. And that's where the spine starts and comes out, your vertebrae. So see, your vertebrae would come out right here and go down. Now, if you take a close look at this, you can see there's these little smooth surfaces here as well on either side of this hole. And when you take this atlas sitting on top of the axis with the condyles, those flat surfaces, that fits right on the skull, so it sits on there on your occipital condyles. Occipital because that's the part of the skull that this is your occipital area of the skull. So these are occipital condyles, and it just fits on there perfectly and sits on there, and that's how your skull is connected to your spine. Okay, so we have the atlas on top, and it spins on the axis, and the axis is what has the dens, or the odontoid process. And you notice these have little condyles also, because the atlas sits on top of here. Oops, this way. The atlas sits on top of here, and there we go. And where it sits on top, these smooth little areas are the condyles where the bone is connected. Now, in the vertebra specifically, a lot of times you'll run into the word facet. And facet, you'll notice that facet is also the smooth areas on here where it bumps up against another bone. Now, a facet and a condyle are pretty much generally the same thing. So don't freak out about the terminology and being like, well, what's the difference between a facet and a condyle? The reason why they call them facets in your vertebrae and not condyles is because your vertebrae, remember, it has the spine and the nervous system going down all the way down your spine. And so the nerves come out of either side of your spine and go all down into the rest of your body. So a facet is just a condyle. It's the same thing, except that a nerve comes out from in between those two condyles where it fits together. And if you can see that, where they fit together, there's a little bit of a gap there, isn't there? That's because a nerve comes out. So that's why they're called facets instead of condyles, but they're the same thing, so don't worry. Now, the atlas and axis, those are your top two cervical bones. Yes, they are considered part of your cervical spine. These are 2 of the 7 in the cervical spine. This is number 1 and number 2. And so you have 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you're on to your thoracic. Your thoracic has 12. And if you notice on your thoracic, they fit together. Here's a condyle or a facet, we're going to call them, because it's because a nerve comes out of it, because this is your spine. They fit together like pieces of a puzzle, just really easy. If you can see that. See, there's this little flat piece here, and there's these little Mickey Mouse ears looking things. And these are smooth facets, and the bottom ones on here snap with the top ones on the next one going down, and they fit together like that. So if you can see them fit together, they fit together real easily. And if I remove this top one, you'll see those Mickey Mouse ears. That's what's connecting to it, and those are the facets. Facets or condyles, whichever you want to say. Now, I call them Mickey Mouse ears because they stick up like that. There's, and this is also a way to notice if it's the thoracic or cervical or lumbar, because, or either the thoracic or lumbar, because the thoracic vertebrae, they have the little Mickey Mouse ears that stick up like this. Okay? Now, if we go down to the lumbar, if you notice the lumbar, here is a lumbar. Now look at the Mickey Mouse ears. They're no longer Mickey Mouse ears. They face each other. See how they face each other now? So that's how you can tell the difference between the thoracic with the Mickey Mouse ears facets with the lumbar facets. The lumbar facets face toward each other like this, so they don't stick up. So lumbar and thoracic, Mickey Mouse ears. Okay? Now, as I said before when I was going over the basics of the skeleton, the term transverse means sticking out to the side, or it means going across in a horizontal direction. So if you were to cut my head off, that's a transverse cut. Okay? Now, on these thoracics and lumbar vertebrae, if you notice this, this looks like it has a little, I always call them elephant trunks. They look like they got little elephant trunks sticking out. Okay, this is the back, your back. So when somebody runs their finger down your spine, this little end tip here is what they're feeling. So this spine is what sticks out in on your back. And these that stick out to the side, guess what they're called? They're called transverse processes, because transverse, sticking out to the side. And a process, you also need to know that, a process is just any part of a bone that sticks out. So this would be a transverse process. The process meaning it sticks out, and the transverse meaning that where does it stick out? It sticks out to the side. So transverse processes. Now, since this little elephant trunk sticks out to toward your back and your spine, that's called your spinal process. A process because it sticks out, and that's what you feel when you feel somebody's spine if you trace your finger down their back. So spinal process. So transverse process, spinal process. Also, I want to show you the difference between, I showed you the difference between the thoracic and the lumbar. The thoracic has the little Mickey Mouse ears sticking up for the facets, and the lumbar, they don't have Mickey Mouse ears, they face each other, so they don't stick up like Mickey Mouse ears do in the lumbar. Now the cervical, you can tell the cervical because if you look at these transverse processes, or processes, or however you say the plural, if you look at these, let me hold this up to my small camera, look at these transverse processes that stick out. You can barely even call them transverse processes because they don't stick out all that very much. But they have these little holes in it, and those are the transverse foramen. As I said before, foramen just means a hole. And they're on either side, they're going this way, and they're on the transverse processes, so we're going to call them the transverse foramen. So we know that we're talking about these little holes on the side and not the big hole that the spinal cord runs through. Okay? So this, if it has holes in the transverse processes, then it's a cervical. This is your part of your neck. And also on the spinal process of the cervical, if you notice, it doesn't just end with a nice little round bump. It has this little, let me see if the camera can pick it up. See this? It has this little V in it. That's your, bifida. So if you hear of somebody being born with a disability called spinal bifida, it means their nerves and everything didn't really form quite right around this bifida little V in the spinal process of the cervical bones. Okay, and I think your teacher might have a picture of spinal bifida of what happens, or it's in the textbook. Now, in the vertebra, and by the way, when you hold up the vertebra, you can tell if it's right side up or not when you're holding up the thoracic vertebra, because these elephant trunks, the spinal process, points down. Okay, you don't get spines with them pointing up, sticking up. They point down, so that's how you know you're holding them the right way. If you can see that, they point down. So if you look at, this is the outside of your back, or this is on what you feel when you touch somebody's back. If you look at it to the side and kind of to the top here, there's a big section of just bone. Your spinal cord goes down this big hole, And in between each of these, when they're fit together, there's cartilage that come in between each of these big sections called intervertebral discs. Now, when you put these all together, and oh, by the way, intervertebral discs, inter just means between, I-N-T-E-R, not E-N-T-E-R like you enter a building, but I-N-T-E-R just means between. So you have interstate, that's a highway that runs between two different states. So inter means between. So intervertebral discs are the name of the cartilage that comes between the big sections of bone. Okay, now when you put all these together, and it's kind of like a little puzzle. If you notice, when you put all these together, let's see if you can see that, there are these little holes in between where they fit together. And that's so the nerves can come out, like I was saying before, which is why we call these facets and not condyles, the smooth sections that fit together. They're just called facets because a nerve runs out right next to it. But they're still condyles, but they're specific kind of condyles or facets. So where these holes are and the nerves run out, these are called intervertebral foramina or foramen. Foramen just means a hole. Foramina is plural, that just means holes. So foramen is a hole, so this is an intervertebral foramen. And remember, inter just means between, so it's the hole between the vertebra, intervertebral. Intervertebral foramen, this is an intervertebral foramen. All of them together would be called intervertebral foramina because the foramina just means many, it's plural. Now when you have these and you have this spinal process sticking out, here's the main body. This is the vertebral body, the big fat portion of the bone, vertebral body. And then here's the spinal process sticking out right here. So in between the body and the rest of the spinal process, if I'm going to hold this up like this, you can see that there are, let's get you, and we're going to look at it from underneath. So this is going to be an inferior view because we're going to look at it from underneath. This is the bottom. So here is, if you look at the bottom, here's the vertebral body, and then there's kind of like these skinny sides to this making up the spinal hole, the hole where the spine goes. And that's called the pedicle. So once again, here's the vertebral body, this big portion all over here. And then see these little skinny sides to the hole. Here's where your spine goes. Your spine goes down here. And again, this is underneath. We're looking at it from an inferior viewpoint. So you see these little sides to the wall that form the circle. That's called the pedicle. And then up here, on top of the transverse process up to the spinal process, this little section is called the lamina. So lamina and pedicle, and those are just, that's just so you can tell what part of the circle you're talking about. So the lamina would be like your 10 and 2, and the pedicle would be like your 4 and 8 in the circle, if you're holding it up this way, the way I'm holding it up. So now, as I said before, when you fit these together, let's get another one on here. When you fit these together, we have, and here's a side view, here's your spinal process, this is your back. If you run your finger down somebody's back, this is what you feel. Spinal process. These sticking out to the sides are transverse processes. Transverse because it's out to the side, process because it sticks out. And when you put all these together, these little holes, that's where the nerves come out. So these are the intervertebral foramen, where the nerves come out. But if you turn it this way, So you're looking at it from the top down. So this is the superior view because we're standing above and we're looking down. See the main hole? This is where your spine goes through this. So your spine will go through this and all the way down your spinal cord. This main hole, so this main hole that your spinal cord runs down through, here's the vertebral body, this big part of the vertebra. And here's the main hole that runs all the way down your spine, that your spinal cord goes down. That's called the vertebral canal. And it's called the canal because it's like a long tunnel. So that's how we know the difference between a foramen, which is just a hole, but a canal is more like a long tunnel that stuff goes through. You know, like a train tunnel or something, that would be a canal. So this is your vertebral canal that your spinal cord goes all the way down your body. But on this, if you look at it from the sides here, your nerves come out each side. Here's looking at it from the back. And your nerves will come out each side. And they'll come out and go down your arms. They'll come out and go down to your side. That's the intervertebral foramen. Now let me take this opportunity to show you the sacrum, which is at the very bottom of the vertebra. Here's the sacrum. So as I said before in the other video, when you're born, these are 5 individual vertebra. And it's not until you're in your 20s, I think, that they fuse together and turn into one bone like this. So see, here is, you can see the remnants of spinous processes for 5 vertebra right here. Here's the remnants of the spinous processes for the 5 vertebra that you're born with. And then by the time you're in your 20s, it fuses all together and it turns into this big one piece called your sacrum. Now, I'm hiding this down here at the very tip. Ta-da! Here at the very tip, it comes down, and there are 5 more vertebra that are, or 4 more, excuse me, I'm sorry, 4 more vertebra that are fused together, and this is your tailbone, and this is called your coccyx. So this line, if you can see this line of demarcation right here, it's sort of an indentation. This indentation right above my finger, that's the beginning of the coccyx, and it comes down here. And that's 4 vertebra fused together. And then the sacrum is 5 vertebra fused together. Now, if you look at this and turn it around, this is the inside of it. This is the outside. This is where your butt is, pretty much. This is the outside. Here's your tailbone, your butt bone, your coccyx. So let's look at the inside of it. And you see where the vertebra has fused together, and there's these, it leaves these lines where it's fused together. These are just transverse lines. Remember that word transverse? It just means horizontally, side to side, transverse. So these are just called transverse lines. Now let's go back to this is your posterior view of it, because this is, if you were standing behind someone and looking at them like an x-ray, this is what you would see. Up here is called the ala, and then there's some facets right here for your last lumbar bone to attach to. That's the wrong lumbar bone. It's not big enough. Here we go. So your last lumbar bone attaches. Here's your lumbar vertebra. So it attaches right there. So see, these are the facets, or the little Mickey Mouse ears, where it attaches to your last lumbar bone at the bottom of your spine, of your vertebra, before it goes into the sacrum. And then the little elephant ears sticking out here are called your ala, A-L-A. I'm not sure why. This is the base, is the entire top. The base is usually the flat surface. Like the apex is always the pointy surface, and you're going to get this when you study the heart also. The apex is the point, and the base is the flat. So if this were a triangle, if I turn this upside down as a triangle, I could set this down on the table, and it would just sit there because it's got the flat bottom. So the base, don't get confused and think the base is at the bottom. It's actually at the top. The base is just the flat line of the triangle, and the apex is the pointy point of the triangle. And it's the same way with your heart, but we'll get into that when we get into the circulation system. If you can tell here, there are holes. Here's the posterior view, and there's holes because remember these were vertebra and they're fused together, so it leaves these holes. These are called the Sacral Foramina. Foramina just means more than one hole, so you can say this is the Sacral Foramen, this is a Sacral Foramen, this is a Sacral Foramen. Altogether they're Sacral Foramina. And you can see them, they go all the way through. Here's the anterior view of it. Here's the transverse lines, and the transverse lines go out to the sacral foramen, the sacral foramina. And of course the apex is this pointy, is the pointy point. Base is up here. If you look at this, remember the vertebral body in the vertebra. This also has kind of the same thing because where the lumbar bone attaches to it, see here's the lumbar body, and it sits on there. So it fits like a piece of a puzzle. So that's called the sacral promontory. And then of course at the very end after the apex is your coccyx. Also I want to point out, if you remember in the vertebra, when we put the vertebra together, there's a hole that goes all the way down. Remember what that hole is called? The vertebral canal. And that's where your spinal cord goes all the way down your back. Now, since this used to be vertebra and it's fused together, actually you can't see it on this model, but there's like a hole where the vertebral canal used to be. And there's a hole that continues to go down inside of here, inside of where you see the remnants of the spinal processes, which is called the sacral crust. And the sacral crust is just that, where you see the remnants of the spinal processes. Again, let me hold it up to the other camera. See where you see the spinal processes sticking out when it used to be vertebra, individual vertebra? So this whole thing going down is called the sacral crust. And there used to be a hole right here, and because you're in the vertebra, there's a hole right here for your vertebral canal, so your spinal cord can go down it. So that is actually called the sacral canal because it's still there, it's just in there. You just can't see it on the model because this is a plaster cast, but there's still a remnant of this hole from when these were vertebra, and that's the sacral canal. Now where the hole ends down here and it closes out and the vertebra stop and then it turns into the coccyx, where the hole ends, that's called the sacral hiatus. And hiatus just means an end of something or a break. Like if you take a hiatus from school, you're taking a break from school. So a hiatus is a break. So where the sacrum breaks right here, that's the sacral hiatus. Now I'm just going to show you really quickly the front. I showed you the back, and I'm going to show you the front. This is what the sternum looks like by itself, and these are the costal cartilages that come out that the ribs are connected to. See that? These are the cartilages that come out. But this is the sternum. And as I showed you before in the other video on the skeleton, this little top section is the Manubrium. I think it looks like it's shaped like a heart. And this is the sternal body. And then down here, this little tip is called the xiphoid process. Also, when you look at a rib, this is a rib. When you look at a rib, here's what you need to know. You need to notice that on, let's see, let me do it on this camera. You need to notice that one end of the rib is all rough. See that? It's real rough and bumpy. The other end of the rib is a real smooth cut. See the smooth cut. So you need to be able to differentiate between the rough and bumpy end and the smooth cut end. And when you do that, you turn it inside. This is the interior of the rib. The exterior would be this way. The interior of the rib, you see this long line, kind of where it's molded differently. So here's the angle. Here's the shaft. These bumpy things are called tubercles. And a tubercle is just a place where like a muscle or a ligament or something is attached to the bone. So tubercle is this rough and bumpy thing. And here's the superficial surface out here. And the rough tubercle, here's the rough tubercle right there. Just the rough part, not the whole section of bone, but just the rough bump is called the tubercle. The end that has the tubercles is called the head of the ribs, or the capitulum. It's the same thing. Capitulum is just a fancy word for head. So this is the head of the rib. And on the bumpy section, you can see that it smooths out a little bit where it can connect to something else. So that is called an articular facet on the head. And articular just means connection. It's a connection point. So if it's an articulated skeleton, that means it's a skeleton that's all hooked together, so it looks like a skeleton. If it's disarticulated, it's taken apart in little pieces like this. This is a disarticulated rib. So an articulator or an articular facet is just a facet where it connects to something else, which is sort of redundant because the word facet already implies that it connects to something else, but they call them articular facets. Don't ask me why. Now, if you hold this, make sure this little groove here, and this again, this is the inside of the rib. Make sure this little groove is on the bottom. This goes on the inferior section of the rib, and it's called the costal groove. Costal meaning rib, and the cartilage in between the ribs. And so this is where it bumps up against the cartilage in between the ribs, costal groove. And one more thing, as I showed you, there's the rough head of the rib. The head or capitulum has the tubercles in it. The tubercle is the little rough section. The head is the section of the rib that has the tubercles in it. The head is what connects to your vertebra, to your backbone. And then if you look at the other end of this, rib, it's very smooth and it looks like it was cut with a knife, real smooth. This is what attaches to the cartilage in the front, in the anterior part, right next to your sternum. So here's your sternum. Let's see. Here's your sternum, and see here is the really smooth end, the superficial surface of the rib, and it connects right there real smoothly to the cartilage, like that. Your head of your rib with the rough tubercle on it connects to your backbone, to your vertebra. And the costal groove, once again, The costal groove goes on the bottom of the rib. So don't hold it upside down because you'll get it mixed up which is left and which is a right rib. You need to know, you need to be able to pick up a rib and go, this is a left rib or this is a right rib. You don't have to know where it's at on the body. You just need to know left and right. So make sure the costal groove is inside and on the bottom of the rib when you hold it. Okay? So that's it. That's it for now, and I was hoping this video would be shorter than what it was, but this will get you started on studying the vertebra, the axial skeleton pretty much, and we'll do the skull in a different video because it's its own thing, and then we'll do the appendicular bones, you know, your arms and legs. We'll do those in other videos also. So as always, please text me or email me or leave a comment in the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks.